Walter Huston's lasting flame. A tribute 74 years later, April 7th, 1950. A legend passes, and Hollywood dims its lights. But long before the awards and applause, before the gold statues and standing ovations, there was just a boy. In the snow, in the shadows, in Toronto. Walter Huston was born in 1883 to a working-class family where dreams were luxuries and survival was the only goal. His hands were meant for tools, not scripts. His voice destined for labor, not for stage. He wasn't groomed for greatness. There were no drama schools or wealthy patrons in his childhood. Only cold mornings, long hours, and the flickering hope that life could be more. Every night after work, while others drank or slept, Walter would rehearse lines in front of a cracked mirror. Shakespeare, Molière, stray pages of plays he could barely afford. He wasn't escaping, he was becoming. In a world where survival was expected and self-expression was suspect, young Walter dared to imagine a different identity, one shaped not by poverty, but by presence, not by hardship, but by performance. He didn't know it yet, but the boy in the frost-bitten streets of Toronto was walking toward a stage the world hadn't built for him yet. Walter left Canada not with a plan, but with a pulse. He wasn't fleeing poverty, he was chasing possibility. With no promise of success, he stepped onto a train headed south, carrying nothing but an old suitcase, some worn-out scripts, and a voice that had yet to be heard. He wandered from town to town, crisscrossing America like a traveling ghost, booking stage jobs where he could. His resume, passion, his agent, persistence. In dusty community theaters and creaking makeshift stages, he played soldiers with cardboard sword, drunken uncles, bitter kings, all for pennies and polite applause. But Walter didn't act for money. He acted because the silence between each line made his heart beat louder. He studied his audience the way others studied scripts, noticing what moved them, what bored them, what made them lean in without realizing. And every town, every performance, every bad costume and missed line taught him something. Not just how to perform, but how to transform. It was on those unremarkable stages, before half-asleep crowds in folding chairs, that Walter Huston began to disappear. And in that disappearance, the actor was born. In a city built on noise, Walter Huston made his mark through silence. The kind of silence that made room still, the kind that demanded attention without raising a voice. He stepped into the world of silent film, an art form where gestures spoke louder than words and the eyes had to carry entire storylines, where a glance had to break hearts and stillness could scream. While others struggled to adapt their stage theatrics to the screen, Walter simply understood. His every movement was economical, deliberate, mesmerizing. He wasn't playing a part. He was revealing truths. In the Christian, in the virtuous sin, and countless other early features now buried by time, Walter's presence lingered. Not just because of his performance, but because of his restraint. He wasn't conventionally handsome. He didn't dazzle with charm, but there was a gravity to him, a weight that pulled your eyes back to him in every frame. While others chased stardom, Walter chased clarity. He turned the limitations of the silent film into opportunities, to whisper instead of shout, to haunt instead of explain. In the late 1920s, the unthinkable happened. Movies began to speak. Sound came crashing into Hollywood like a tidal wave and swept away half the industry. Actors who once reigned supreme found themselves silenced by their own voices. Heavy accents, weak projection, awkward phrasing. The camera no longer loved them in silence. Studios panicked. Careers ended overnight. The art of subtle movement was replaced by the chaos of clunky dialogue. And then came Walter Huston. His voice was unlike anything the microphones had captured before. Deep, measured, articulate. It wasn't just sound, it was presence. A voice trained not by screen tests, but by decades of theater. Suddenly, his background in stage acting became a superpower. He brought gravitas to every line, command to every pause. While others stumbled into the sound era, Walter marched through it, like a king returning to his throne. In roles like the Virginian and Abraham Lincoln, His voice didn't just deliver lines, it sculpted them. He didn't merely survive the talkies, he mastered them. And once the world heard Walter Huston, they never wanted silence again. Walter Huston didn't just take roles, he wore them like second skin. He didn't act characters, he resurrected them. And nowhere was this more evident than in his portrayal of Abraham Lincoln. In the 1930 film directed by D.W. Griffith, Walter embodied the 16th President of the United States with such somber dignity and conviction that even critics who doubted the film couldn't deny the power of his performance. He wasn't just reading speeches. He seemed to carry the entire weight of a fractured nation on his back. The furrowed brow, the steady gait, the eyes that had seen too much. Walter's Lincoln wasn't a statue brought to life. He was a man broken and resolute. And then came Dodsworth, a film that would cement Walter Huston not just as a star, but as an actor's actor. Sam Dodsworth was a man successful on paper, but unraveling at the seams. A husband, a businessman, a man outpaced by the changing world around him. Walter captured every shade of that unraveling. He played vulnerability without weakness, confusion without self-pity. And when Dodsworth finally reclaims his dignity, it's not just a character arc, it's a quiet revolution. In Lincoln, Walter stood for a nation. In Dodsworth, he stood for every man who's ever wondered if he matters. And in both, he left audiences breathless. Behind the brilliance of Walter Huston stood a quieter role, one far more personal, far more complicated, father, and the boy who grew up in his shadow, John Huston, rebellious, creative, destined. Their relationship wasn't painted in warm hues. It was a mosaic of pride and pressure, of admiration clouded by expectation. John once admitted, "My father was too perfect, too commanding. He didn't raise a bar, he was the bar." And yet, from that friction, like steel against flint, sparks flew. Sparks that would eventually light the fuse of a revolution in cinema. Walter never taught John how to direct. He taught him how to care, how to commit to a scene like it's the last you'll ever perform, how to pour everything you are into a character and then walk away empty. Years later, in one of Hollywood's rare poetic moments, father and son came together on a film that changed both their lives. The Treasure of the Sierra Madre. John behind the camera, Walter in front, two Hustons, one heartbeat. And when Walter delivered that performance, the wise, weathered prospector full of laughter and sorrow, you could almost hear generations speaking at once. A dynasty didn't begin there. It announced itself. It was the night Hollywood gave thanks. 1949, the Academy Awards, and amidst the glitter, the gowns, the rehearsed speeches, something quietly extraordinary happened. Walter Huston won Best Supporting Actor for The Treasure of the Sierra Madre. But this wasn't just an award. It was a recognition long overdue, a moment earned not by trend, but by truth. As Howard, the eccentric prospector, with a grin that cut deeper than any scowl, Walter brought humor, wisdom, and that rarest of gifts, sincerity. He made us laugh at the darkest parts of human greed and trust him while doing it. But the role wasn't the only story, because sitting behind the camera was his son, John Huston, director, collaborator, son. The same boy who once feared living in his father's shadow had now shined a spotlight on him. When Walter's name was called, he didn't launch into a speech. He didn't cry. He didn't wave the statue like a trophy. He simply looked at his son, nodded, and smiled. And that somehow was more powerful than any monologue he ever delivered on screen. That night, the Oscars didn't just crown a performance, they crowned a lineage, a shared love between generations, a cinematic heartbeat passed from father to son, and now to history. Narrator. Stage lights can illuminate a man, but they also cast shadows. And behind the spotlights that made Walter Huston a legend, there was another story playing out in silence. One of love lost, solitude endured, and the price of devotion to craft. He was married 3 times, each woman drawn to his intensity, his charm, his fire, and each one eventually scorched by it. They say Walter loved deeply, but not durably. He belonged to the role, to the rehearsal, to the stage, to everyone and to no one. The tabloids called him complicated, a playboy, a man who couldn't settle down. But behind the printed words and exaggerated headlines was something simpler and far sadder. There were nights, many of them, where Walter would sit alone in his dressing room long after the crowd had gone. The applause faded, the makeup half wiped, the mirror staring back blankly. And in that stillness, it became clear he could vanish into any character, but never truly find himself. Maybe he wasn't unloved. Maybe he simply gave everything he had to something that could never love him back. On April 7th, 1950, the curtain closed one final time. Walter Huston, humble legend, unembellished icon, took his last breath at age 66. No warning, no press tour, no final bow, just silence, and then absence. His death didn't make a spectacle. It didn't need to. It was a soft, deliberate ending to a lifelong performance. A final line delivered with grace by not delivering one at all. In Hollywood, the lights dimmed, not as a formality, but as a reflex, as if the city itself knew it had lost something real. There was no one to yell cut, but everyone knew the scene had ended. The papers didn't talk about the 3 divorces or the whispers of loneliness. They spoke of an actor who carried every role with truth, who turned silence into power, who taught generations how to mean every word, even the unspoken ones. Walter didn't need a grand finale. His life was the crescendo, and when it ended, it left behind not just a filmography, but a feeling. He left this world the same way he left every stage, with honesty, quiet, and unforgettable weight. Walter Huston may have passed, but the flame he lit never died. It continued to burn in the heart of his son, John Huston. A man who didn't just follow in his father's footsteps, he carved an entirely new cinematic path from them. John didn't inherit fame, he inherited discipline, a hunger for truth, a sharp eye for human contradiction. From the Maltese Falcon to the African Queen, he directed stories that refused to lie, just like his father's performances. And then came the third act, Anjelica Huston, Walter's granddaughter. Timeless in presence, fierce in performance. With an Oscar of her own, she completed a triad rarely seen in Hollywood. 3 generations, 3 artists, 1 name, 1 legacy. The Huston bloodline doesn't echo, it resounds. Not in museums or old scripts, but in every frame where a character dares to be honest, every scene that chooses silence over spectacle, every performance that bleeds instead of boasts. And if you look closely, just closely enough, in the corner of the screen or at the edge of a long pause, you might still catch him. A glance, a shadow, a whisper. Walter Huston, still here, still watching, still reminding us that legends, like stage lights, may dim, but they never truly go out.